Good afternoon, honourable members. The Committee on Bill 9, Workers' Compensation Amendment Act 2018 shall come to order on Section 1. Shall Section 1 pass? So ordered. On Section 2? So ordered. On Section 3? So ordered. Section 4? So ordered. Section 5? So ordered. Shall the title pass? So ordered. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the committee rise and report the bill complete without amendments.
All members for the question. All those in favour? Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried.
Committee Chair.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee on Bill 9, Workers' Compensation Amendment Act 2018, reports the bill complete without amendment.
And when shall the bill be read for a third time?
No, Mr.
Minister.
Speaker.
The question is third reading of Bill number 9. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed, nay. Yes.
I rise to take my place in third reading to address the bill before the House at this particular juncture. I do rise with a great deal of dismay, knowing that this bill went through committee stage in but 5 minutes. At a time, I'll wait for the clerk to pass the message on. Honourable Speaker, as it's known, I had motions on the order paper that I'd given notice to the Minister, and I'd give notice to opposition. And opposition informed me that they had numerous questions to raise on this bill. I was in a meeting downstairs. I'm 3 minutes late for the start. Now, I understand parliamentary rules, and I understand parliamentary rules are such that I missed the approval of the title. But at third reading, I'd like to provide more reasons why I have profound troubles with this bill. Profound troubles with this bill as put forward to us now. Those troubles are the fact, Honourable Speaker, that this bill does not include, number one, 9/11 dispatchers. Honourable Speaker, I tell you, after the member from Vancouver, the minister now from Vancouver East Hastings rose and spoke yesterday, I received an email from one of the people he mentioned, who he had consulted in developing his private member's bill. And that person had a panic attack, Honourable Speaker, when he thanked her for input and the government ignored in this legislation 9/11 dispatchers, despite the fact that they've actually included this 9/11 dispatchers in the private member's bill that the member from Vancouver Hastings, now minister, brought to this in 2016 and, Honourable Speaker, in 2017 as well. Now, I get the BC Liberals are playing games. I get the fact that they don't actually want to have this debated, and I get the fact that they say one thing and do an absolute other. I get the fact that the member from Chilliwack, the critic for this file, who had told me that he had a number of questions to ask, would but ask 5 minutes of questions while I'm meeting with developers who are profoundly troubled, Honourable Speaker, about the direction this government is taking on the speculation tax. Honourable Speaker, if opposition opposite did their job, we'd still be debating this bill, and the BC Greens, who had spent many, many hours, Honourable Speaker, consulting with stakeholders from north to south and east to west in this province about what's not in this bill, we would actually have a debate of substance in this bill, on the issues contained. But members opposite abdicated their responsibility as elected members to the BC legislature to raise issues and bring these issues forward for debate. And that, Honourable Speaker, is unacceptable. It is unacceptable for members of that party opposite to not stand in this House and take to task the minister for a bill that he has introduced, that they have had time to explore when it was a private member's bill introduced earlier. And after being told, Honourable Speaker, after being told that they were going to do this. That's actually that's shameful, Honourable Speaker. I get they can play games. But what message I want people to take home today here, the message I want people to take home is in this place it's not about doing what's right for the people of British Columbia. It's about doing what's right for petty political games for the BC Liberals. And frankly, I think the BC NDP owes some responsibility here too, because they knew that I had these amendments on the order paper. I struggle right now whether or not I'm going to support this bill. Whether or not I'm going to support this bill and call division to have a standing vote on this bill because of the fact of what's not included. Because what just transpired, Honourable Speaker, in this House is reprehensible. Reprehensible to nurses in the province of British Columbia. Nurses struggling with PTSD. Nurses struggling with systemic mental health issues from their job. What's wrong with this legislation is we're not talking about teachers in this province of British Columbia. Teachers who work in environments of bullying and harassment with unsupportive administrators who struggle and take leave, but they're not covered by WCB because they have to prove that their mental illness or disorder directly came from their workplace. And they have to go to the WCB and actually argue their case. And what can be more profoundly troubling to an individual than have to stand and recant their stories and relive their experiences because the presumptive clause doesn't apply to them? Shame on the members of the BC Liberal Party. How you can go back to your constituents, 9/11 responders, nurses, teachers, factory workers, construction workers, how you can go back to them and say that you played political games in this House today so that we're not debating amendments to actually put their interests first. Honourable Speaker, this is a very sad day in politics in British Columbia, when once again the BC Liberals put their political interests, their desire not to have debate because of their quest for power, ahead of the interests and their responsibility and the rights of British Columbians. There were a number of things that I had put on the order paper. I put two orders. One is to have a presumptive clause for all workers. Now, I fortunately am here to say to those listening that I've had very, very good conversations and follow-up with the minister about the importance of this issue. And I truly believe that the minister understands this issue. And I truly believe that we will see action in a timely fashion, particularly with the 9/11 responders. That, to me, is critical. But again, what we need to recognize is what's happening in other jurisdictions. Let's look at the case of Florida, for example. There is not a person in this place who does not recall what happened tragically in Parkland High School in Florida. Not a member in this place. What do they have in Florida? They've introduced presumptive clauses for PTSD, for 9/11 responders, because they are the frontline responders, Honourable Speaker. They are the first people to take the call. They're the person talking to a child huddled under a desk while someone's going by and shooting their friends to death in the hallway. This is the people who have to deal with PTSD, and this government and opposition, through their silly, petty games, have actually put them and thrown them under the bus. You can tell I'm passionate about this, Honourable Speaker, because this is wrong. This is not right. This is not how this place should function. And frankly, I think the member of Chilliwack should resign as the critic and resign his chair, as he did not put the people of British Columbia front and center here. They think that this is funny. They think that this is funny, Honourable Speaker, and that's what's wrong with that party. This isn't a game. This is about good policy for people. This is about when you say something to someone, that this place only functions if you can trust your colleagues when they say they're going to do something, that they will actually do something. But no, that's not the case for the BC Liberals. Let's go to the province of Nova Scotia. The province of Nova Scotia, which in September of 27th of this last year passed a bill to expand presumptive PTSD to 9/11 operators and continuing care workers. Two different groups, Honorable Speaker. Why? I come back to the story, the compelling story that I read yesterday about a first responder. Now, I get that some first responders, the 9/11 dispatchers, are already paramedics or already police officers, and so will be covered under the presumptive clauses. So not only have we got a problem here, Honourable Speaker, we have an equity problem. If you happen to be an RCMP dispatcher, you're likely covered. But if you're in a local government, you're not. If you're the dispatcher who actually is dealing with the Parkland shooter, in Florida you'd be covered, but not in the province of British Columbia, Honourable Speaker. Not in the province of British Columbia, for two reasons. One, this government forgot, frankly, in my view, to put it in the legislation. But more importantly, Honourable Speaker, is the fact that the members opposite of the BC Liberals, who should be hanging their head in shame today, saw fit to end debate on this because of the fact that I'm about 3 minutes late, Honourable Speaker. 3 minutes, despite the fact I'm told there were many questions to come. That's clever. That's clever politics. Got to give it to the BC Liberals. That's what they're good at. It's all about politics for them. It was all about politics in the election. The Kinder Morgan pipeline, the 5 conditions, all about politics. All about politics. They have no credibility. And Honourable Speaker, I must say, I use the word honourable, and I mean that dearly and sincerely when I say Honourable Speaker here, because I see a man of honour in the Speaker's chair, a man in honour in the Speaker's chair, and I don't know how he ever could have sat on that side of the House with those members opposite, Honourable Speaker. Honourable Speaker, coming back to the bill, we have a problem. We have a problem with the fact that right now, this bill is oiling the squeaky wheel. It's oiling the squeaky wheel of those who lobby the best. There's no question we need to have presumptive clauses for police, firefighters, correction officers, sheriffs. But there's also no question in my mind, Honourable Speaker. There's no question in my mind that we need to include emergency dispatchers. We need to include teachers. We need to include nurses. We need to include workers on the construction site. You know what? If a worker on a construction site falls and breaks his or her arm, they're covered under WCB. They don't have to go through the presumptive clause when they show up in a cast and say, this happened at work. But let's suppose somebody falls from a high crane and lands sadly and gets splattered across the ground directly in front of a worker on a construction site. And that worker struggles with some mental disorder after that. Right now, there's no presumption clause. That worker has to prove to WCB that the PTSD that they saw was a direct consequence of that incident. And that's wrong, Honourable Speaker. That's wrong, and Saskatchewan understand that that's wrong. Alberta understand that that's wrong. And in both of those provinces, we have all workers, as defined under the acts, their respective workers' compensation acts. All workers are covered under the presumptive clause. Now, I understand that there was a possibility that one of my or two of my amendments would have been ruled under order because there might have been fiscal consequences associated with it. I understand that. The minister has missed an opportunity, though, to be able to put onto the record what his views are on this issue. It's a very sad opportunity that it's a very good opportunity that he's missed. And the members opposite have missed an opportunity to actually let British Columbians what they think. Well, their actions have told British Columbians what they think about this bill. Their actions have said they're not willing to do their job as opposition. Heavens forsake, why don't half of you guys quit? Let's have an election, let's get some more BC Greens down here, and we'll do their job for them if they're not willing to do it themselves. To actually hold government to account, not ask stupid questions about stuff to try to score political games, but actually hold government to account for their actions as seen in the bill. Not act as apologists, but actually hold government to account. It's shameful what we just witnessed there from the BC Liberals today. I come back to the teachers, Honourable Speaker. Teachers in British Columbia, none of whom now are either afforded the opportunity to have able to hear the minister's response, the debate, members opposite, discuss what they thought about their views. Given that you've missed the opportunity to hear what the BC Liberals and the BC NDP believe to be their views, I'll tell you what the BC Green views are. The BC Green views are this: no teacher should have to stand in front of the Workmen Compensation Board and argue that the fact that they have depression and anxiety issues from working in an intolerant workplace where their school administrator doesn't support them and their school board and school administration, district administration don't support them. No person should have to relive that experience in front of the Workmen's Compensation Board. Instead, just like in Alberta and just like in Saskatchewan, the presumptive clause should be applied to them. I don't know how many teachers I know, Honourable Speaker, who have had to deal with this. In fact, if you look at statistics in British Columbia, something to pushing almost 50% of new teachers actually quit the teaching profession in the first 5 years. Why do they do that, Honourable Speaker? Why do they do that, Honourable Speaker? Because of the situation they've been put in many cases, it's overwhelming. But they have no place to go now, Honourable Speaker. They can go on LTD and get a fraction of their wage, but if they actually had a presumptive clause within their contracts, it would force school districts administration to actually ensure that the working environment that these teachers actually participate in is one that's conducive, friendly, safe, free of bullying, free of harassment. But that's not going to happen here in the province of British Columbia because members opposite saw so fit as to play silly political games to try to avoid discussion on the amendments before us. Again, let's move beyond the teachers. Let's talk about nurses. Let's talk about nurses, and I'm sure many members here, I can't be the only member, well, probably the only member in opposition who actually reads their emails. I'm pretty sure none of them do. They probably have their staff read them and they don't respond themselves. Well, frankly, I know that to be the case because I get so many people from their ridings email our office pointing out that they get no response from the BC Liberals, and will we please help them out? I will put the member from Prince George Valemount. I'll say that that is not the case with her, but I've got it from so many others sitting there right now. Honourable Speaker, let's go to nurses. Nurses, and I can take a particular, I don't know how half the nurses do their job, but let me tell you a story about my daughter. Let me tell you a story that to me tells me the type of environment nurses have to work in. My daughter had a very, very serious issue, heart issue, very serious issue, and she was misdiagnosed by the pediatrician. A young pediatrician, straight out of med school, who had diagnosed it as something different. The nurse was there. The nurse says, I know what this is. I've worked here for 30 years. This doctor is not listening to me. He won't do anything, but this is what it is. Fortunately, Honourable Speaker, fortunately I have some experience. I have some experience in research. And so I went down to the medical library and I started researching this disease. I went down and I phoned, one of my colleagues happened to be in Scripps Institute in California. And it's one of the leading researchers areas on this disease. I was able to find out about this disease. I was able to find out about the cure for this disease. And with the help of that nurse, I was able to follow as I was told, to advocate on behalf of my child and demand a second opinion in the hospital because the treatment that was being offered was not going to help her and actually was going to make her worse. But that ended up in a happy place. My daughter got better. But I can imagine that nurse having to go through that day in, day out with other patients, watching children suffer because a doctor who happens to think that they know everything and the nurse knows nothing won't listen to them. This isn't dissing doctors in general, but it's symptomatic of human behavior. In all our society, there are people who are not willing to listen. There are people who know better than everyone. There are people who do not respect their staff's opinions. And people sometimes have to work in that. And the whole purpose of having these nurses included was to ensure that when systemic issues like that are in play, which can lead clearly to long-term mental disorders, clearly they should not have to relive these experiences before the WCP to prove, Honourable Speaker, that this is a direct consequence of this. Now, I suspect the member opposite are you hoping to introduce. I don't believe that is allowed under rules because one size. what I can ask, Honourable Speaker, is to seek leave to pause briefly to allow the member to introduce the guests and then continue with.
Yes, if we may.
Okay.
Thank you. A member for Surrey Cloverdale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's just an opportunity to give the honourable member a moment to catch his breath as I introduce one of three classes that are coming today from a school in my district. They are from Surrey Christian School, grade 5 students with their parents and teacher, and I ask that the House would please make them welcome here as they enjoy the debates. Sure.
Leader, third party, continue.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. We've got a full 2 hours to work with on this bill, and I'm looking forward to using as much of that as possible as I try to yes, at third reading, I believe I get, as the designated speaker, a full 2 hours to address this. I would seek clarification from the clerk with reference to standing orders, please, to actually ensure and let me know how much time I actually have. Anyway, back to the. We've talked about nurses. Let me talk about some other. Can you imagine the tragedy that happened at Burns Lake? The explosion of a mill. Now, I'm pretty sure that there are a number of workers at this mill who, after the mill exploded and live in the community, actually are suffering from issues with respect to PTSD, mental health issues, depression and anxiety, as a direct consequence of that mill explosion. But what they have to do, what's the two mean? That's exactly, I have 2 hours. Take your seat, Liberals opposite. You had the opportunity to have a short debate. I'd love to inform you of this issue in much more detail, but seeing as you're willing to abdicate your responsibility to serve as opposition and quiz government on a critical bill that's before us here in the House today. One that actually adds a presumptive clause for mental health issues to all workers in the province. To firefighters, to paramedics, police officers, correction officers, and sheriffs, but not all workers in the province, and I'm laying the case as to why that has to happen. I will tell people listening on TV now or checking the Hansard later that I come back to this, and I'll come back to this periodically over the next 2 hours as we enjoy this debate, that I have had good discussions with the minister. Good discussions with the minister about the fact that this is only a beginning. I wish he'd had the opportunity to say that to himself. This is only the beginning of moving this bill forward. And rest assured, people reading to this, rest assured, I'm not going to give this one up. I'm going to be like a dog with a bone, more like a pit bull with a bone on this issue, because it is wrong. It is wrong not to have emergency dispatchers included. It is wrong not to have other workers included. And it is wrong not to follow the leadership of Alberta and Saskatchewan and actually have a presumptive clause for all workers. You know, let's go back to the issue in Nova Scotia. In Nova Scotia or Florida. Again, these issues in are front and center in their legislation, recent legislation. Most provinces in the country have the same thing for 9/11 dispatchers. It makes no sense to me when you talk about emergency responders, and this is what I find remarkable about. I'm going to focus on the 9/11 dispatchers exclusively right now. What I find remarkable about their omission is that when you say first responder, government and opposition for years have included 9/11 dispatchers in their understanding of what first responders are. So much so that the member from Vancouver Hastings had them included in his private member's bill, brought in 2016, as well as in February of 2017. 2 times, but they're missing. There's no reason for it. And can you imagine now, if you're a local government first responder, and you're sitting next to somebody from the RCMP who's a dispatcher, who happens to be covered because they're a police officer, or an ambulance dispatcher who happens to be a paramedic. They're covered under this, but that community local person sitting right beside them in the same room, call receiver for heaven's sake, getting that distress call. Remember the story, I do apologize to the children in the crowd here about the story that I'm about to tell. The story yesterday I told about a man who phoned in a 911 as he had tried to commit suicide. as his entrails were hanging out. And this woman had to keep him alive, yet she wasn't covered. But her colleague sitting next to her in the RCMP would be covered. It's just wrong, Honourable Speaker. It's just wrong at a very fundamental level. We talked about office workers. What about office workers, Honourable Speaker? The whole purpose of including office workers, bank tellers, employees in universities, in colleges, in schools, and custodians, whatever, the whole point of including them, Honourable Speaker, is that there are many, many environments in the province of British Columbia that are not safe places to work. Not safe places because of systemic workplace bullying, workplace harassment, systemic issues with dysfunctional governance, dysfunctional administration, power over conflicts. I could go on, and the litany of examples I could give would make most people's face drop over here. Unfortunately, half the members opposite spent their entire time in politics, and they probably don't actually have any experience other than that politics, so I could actually provide members from their own staff, Honourable Speaker, from their own staff who came to me because they've experienced this in their MLA offices. This is a problem, but those staff, if they were covered under workman compensation, would actually be able to go and make a claim without having to prove it. They could, would still have to go to a psychiatrist or a qualified psychologist, still have to get the medical evidence, but they'd have benefits right on the get-go. Now let's suppose you're working, I come back to an example that I alluded to at second reading. You're a single mother. You could be a single father, but let's just suppose for clarity, you're a single mother. You're a single mother living in, say, Kamloops, South Thompson riding. You're a single mother living there, and you're working in an office. You're a receptionist in an office. You've got 2 kids at home. You had a deadbeat dad involved. Deadbeat dad got in a car, took off, ran away somewhere. You're stuck paying the bills. You got 2 children. You don't want to go on welfare because you're a worker. You're actually somebody who actually believes in the importance of actually working hard, earning a living. And then you realize that your skills are limited because you've got a job that gives you the right number of hours with the appropriate wage. And there's very few of these jobs. You might be working and developed expertise, say, in terms as a receptionist in, let's say, an auto mechanic shop, for lack of a better example. There's probably a lot of those in Kamloops. Let's think of something there's not. Maybe a college department where you need specific skills. Thompson River Universities, I love the university. Well, let's just find a department there that they need your skills. Now you get in an environment where you need this job, you got kids at home, and the environment is abusive. You got a boss. You got a boss who's abusive. You got a boss who's demeaning. You got a boss with unrealistic expectations. You got a boss who basically has an insecurity complex because they know they shouldn't actually be in their position of authority, but they're your boss. And they try to exert their power because bad bosses lack self-confidence and feel the appropriate way to overcome that self-confidence is to belittle their employees or harass their employees or put unnecessary expectations or put demands on their employees. But you need this job, Honourable Speaker. You need this job because there is no other job that you can have. And you are a single mom. You've got 2 children at home. You're working that job to provide food for your children, and you don't want to go on welfare and the stigma of that. If we had basic income, it would be different. But you don't want to go on welfare. What do? Well, right now, what you do is you can go on disability leave if you happen to be a unionized employee that has a long-term disability plan negotiated with your employer. That's fine. You'll get some reduced salary. Typically, there's a short period of time. Typically, there's an approach to giving it back to work. But if you wanted to go to workman's compensation, suppose you're not even a union employee, you don't have LTD. If you wanted to go to workman's compensation, you have to take the risk, Honourable Speaker, when you expose yourself to make a claim, that they will agree, even if you have professionals, because you have to prove that that is happening in the workforce. You have to relive everything with all the risk of you recanting that story as to whether or not your boss will actually be worse than he or she was, than before. You take on that risk with no certainty as to what the outcome will be. And we had an opportunity here to actually have a presumptive clause, which would give certainty to allow that person to have coverage while they went to make a claim. And if WCB, no one's taken away their rights to challenge a claim. That's what the amendment, which I didn't get a chance to put, although we've all had a chance to read it on the order papers, because it's been there for 2 days, and members opposite knew full well that I was going to raise it. And members opposite actually told me, the member from Chilliwack, that he had a couple more questions to go, and he'll be going for a while. That's good. That's good leadership from the BC Liberals. We had an opportunity to help that person. I don't know how many examples I've heard from professions across British Columbia. Not only firefighters and police officers, there's no question about them requiring presumptive clauses. There's just no question. What about tow truck drivers? You know, Honourable Speaker, prior to getting elected, I had a couple hangover last term. I'm done now, but I'd done a lot of expert witnessing in the forensic meteorology, which is an area where we use meteorological conditions to reconstruct weather conditions, road conditions at the time of the accident. Now, in that time, some of these go to court, some don't. I get to see a lot of pictures. I get to see a lot of pictures, and let me tell you, most people in this room would not want to see those pictures. What you see in these pictures are bits of people splayed across the street, entrails hanging here, decapitation hanging there, missing limb over there. These are not pleasant pictures to see. But I just see pictures. I just see pictures. They're not real to me. Now imagine you're a tow truck driver, and you've been called because you've blocked the main highway on the Coquihalla, and you've been called to move some cars. But because they're doing an investigation, you still got some body parts on the scene, and you show up there. What is the difference between that tow truck driver going there and a first responder who goes there? They see the same thing, but in the one case, we're going to give presumptive clause. In the other, we say, no, we're not going to consider you because you didn't have a lobby group come to the legislature and actually push this forward. You didn't have a lobby group to do that. This is a lack of courage and leadership. A lack of courage and leadership where we could have followed the lead of both Saskatchewan and Alberta and done what they have done and introduced presumptive clauses for all workers covered under the Workmen Compensation Act. But no, we didn't do that because games were played in the legislature here today, Honourable Speaker. Games were played in a desperate attempt, even after I was asked by one member opposite, a member opposite who I actually have a lot of respect for, about how that member was going to contemplate the merits of one of the pieces of one of the amendments and get back to me. It never got back to me because the member from Chilliwack, their critic, decided to shut down debate, despite the fact saying he had a number of questions, because I was 5 minutes late, Honourable Speaker. Not even 5 minutes, I was 3 minutes late, because I had developers in my office who are at wit's end, because the BC Liberals for years ignored the crisis in affordability, and the BC NDP have brought in issues with respect to taxation that have led to a crisis that they have to deal with. And they see us as the only opportunity. So let's get back to this bill, which we should have canvassed much more extensively at committee stage, but member from Chilliwack abdicated his responsibility to do his due diligence. Frankly, British Columbians should be quite upset about that. Coming back to the bill, I've talked about Florida, PTSD responders there. I've talked about Nova Scotia. I've talked about other provinces like Ontario, like Manitoba, like the maritime provinces, that all have presumptive clauses. But we somehow think that in BC, we're not going to actually consider 9/11 responders as emergency responders, as first responders, as those that this legislation should be brought to. You know, I've given examples of nurses, I've given examples of teachers, I've given examples of office workers, I've given examples of construction workers. Let's find other examples. What about a manufacturer? You know, I used to work, one of my first jobs I had as a youngster was in Edinburgh in the Leith Docks. Now, any of you know Edinburgh and the Leith Docks there will know that that is the roughest part of Edinburgh. My first day to work, I showed up, and a guy had his arm covered in stitches because his wife had stabbed him with an umbrella. And the other guy I had to work with had scars around his face because he recently had a beer glass put in his face. Put in his face. Now, Honorable Speaker, I know that there was a student in that environment that was working there. I was a big guy, played rugby, I got on with these guys, but there was a student there who they didn't like, Honorable Speaker. There was a student there that they didn't like. They didn't like this guy because he was nippy. He was nippy. Then two things could have happened. I'll tell you what did happen, and I'll tell you what could have happened. What did happen for this guy is that he had his door slammed in. I worked in this ice factory. We ground ice and put it on fishing boat trawlers, trucks that came to get it. It was, minimum wage, et cetera. So what happened here is they slammed his arm in a door and they broke it. They broke his arm. That young man lived in terror when he came to work, but he needed the money. He wasn't from an uppity side of Edinburgh. He was from the south side, or the north side of Edinburgh. And he needed that money, so he came to work every day and lived in terror as he tried to make a small living. In BC, we had the opportunity to protect someone like that, a factory worker like that. Heaven forbid someone in that ice factory, we had ice grinders there, slipped into an ice grinder. Can you imagine if you'd seen someone fall in that ice grinder and come out into the ice bags that we're holding, in bits and pieces, blocks of cube ice? Can you imagine the PTSD that would have arisen from that? In BC now, we had an opportunity, as Alberta and Saskatchewan have done, to include a presumptive clause that would have said that rather than you have to relive this and go and argue before the WCB that your PTSD or your systemic issues of anxiety and depression have arisen from that incident, despite the fact you have psychiatric and psychological assessments saying it did, you have to argue your case to the WCB, and you get no benefits until that case is approved, despite we had an opportunity to do something different here, to recognize that it's pretty clear that that kid who's living in an abusive environment, there's no way that guy would want to risk his life and go and challenge a ruling about where he is. I mean, because it literally would have been risking his life. Or in the other case, to have to relive going through that ice shredder. I can't imagine it. There's another example, another one of my jobs in Edinburgh. I worked flipping burgers. I worked flipping burgers again on the north side of Edinburgh. That's a tough side of Edinburgh. And there was a guy there, a young guy there, who was a cook. The management didn't like the cook. They didn't like the cook, and so they were very abusive to the cook. The cook took a lot of grief there. He's a short order cook, Honorable Speaker, trying to make ends meet. If that short order cook leant on the stove and burnt his hand, we don't need to worry about presumption there. He burnt his hand in work. But there's a stigma in our society that this government promised that they would take steps to mitigate. A stigma about mental disorders, about anxiety, about depression. For the first time in history, we have a ministry here dedicated to this, dedicated to mental health and addictions. Yet, why we are not actually standing up and standing for what we believe in when we've put in place the mechanism, the support, and campaigned in elections on destigmatizing mental health and illness and treating it as a disease, like no other disease, like any physical disease. We come back as that cook who would get presumption for a burn, but presumption for an abusive, bullying workplace, no way. He'd have to prove it. And good luck trying to prove it in the north side of Edinburgh. Because the word gets out that you're trying to prove it publicly, that's not going to be a good situation. I could go on with other examples, but I did want to come back to the reason why this is critical to have it to all clauses. Is right now, and I come back to the last government and the Premier at the time, who actually saw an opportunity to do something different here, and that was with respect to sexualized violence in post-secondary institutions. Now, what she recognized was that the right thing to do was to force public institutions to develop policies to actually ensure that they had sexualized violence policies to deal with. And the reason why And as I introduced the bill when the last government was in, and what passed eventually in a slightly different form, the reason why, of course, is that public institutions have a vested interest in trying to ensure that actually they are deemed to be safe places for students to come. So what was happening, as I was getting told story after story from institution after institution, there was no one that was particularly bad over another. They all had the problems, and it was systemic. The issues were kept below the surface, and nothing was done. But by forcing policy measures and a process to be in place, these issues now must be dealt with. And that comes to the issue of WCB and the presumptive clause for mental illness. If you are in an abusive work environment, and you actually now report it and go on LTD, nothing gets done. Nothing gets done because there's no incentive for the institution to do anything. There's a fear that there might be, oh, if we react here, they might get mad at us, or, oh, we might do this. But if we had a presumptive clause for mental health and mental health disorders, the WCB rates would start to go up for that institution if they started to see an awful lot of claims emerging from it. And I would have thought the supposed free marketers on the other side would have liked to see this financial measure to ensure that you're actually creating creating a process that actually incentivizes safe workplace. I would have thought that members here, the so-called Labour Party, would have seen the importance of doing this, the importance of creating a stick and a carrot. The stick being the Workmen Compensation Board premiums that every employer has to pay for covered workers. Those go up in an unhealthy work environment. If you start to have a lot of accidents, a lot of people tripping and falling, breaking legs on a lumber mill site, you know your premiums are going to go up. So there's an incentive to make that workplace safe. But again, there seems to be a fundamental lack of understanding in government. I don't even have to talk about opposition, they just abdicated their responsibility on this bill. But in government to recognize that mental disorders are no different from physical disorders. You can say what you like on an election campaign. We're going to create a Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions. That's just lip service. It's kind of like saying to my friend from Saanich North and the Islands beside me, we're going to do truth and reconciliation with Indigenous people. Indigenous communities are sick and tired. Honourable Speaker, there's a direct parallel between this analogy.
Relevance to the bill, member?
There is. There's a direct parallel between politicians saying they want to do truth and reconciliation and their actions, or not thereof. In fact, Indigenous people, Honourable Speaker, are sick and tired of words. They want to see action. And it's exactly the same, and therein lies the analogy, with mental health and addictions. It's really easy to say we're destigmatizing mental health and addictions. So where's the beef? Where's the Alberta beef? Why aren't you actually doing it? You had a ministry to do this. You have an opportunity to do it. You issued a private member's bill, for heaven's sake, in 2016 and 2017 that included 9/11 dispatchers. But we didn't do it. We didn't do it, this opportunity, because of petty games by the BC Liberals, which actually didn't follow through with what they said. You know, Honourable Speaker, this place doesn't work. This place doesn't work if we can't trust that when we say we're going to be up on something, that we will be up on something. I took the opportunity immediately before lunch to show the member from Chilliwack who actually had the amendments. He knew exactly what I was going to do. He knew exactly what I was going to do. And I told him the three amendments, the three phases. I was going to start with the include all workers. The second phase, I mean, I could read it in because this is what I had planned to do, and this is relevant to the bill. The second thing I was going to do is, assuming that there was some objection here for including all workers, I would have given the opportunity for the minister to actually outline the direction he was going to take this legislation in the months ahead. I would have then talked about, okay, we'll understand that. Let's include nurses, social workers, and 9/11 dispatchers right off the bat. We know, we've got so many examples. You've all received emails. Let's put them in with the other first responders. And I would have seen how that debate goes. And if that didn't work, I would have come back with the 9/11 dispatchers, because there is no reason, Honourable Speaker, there is no reason why this bill does not include 911 dispatchers, or more formally 911 emergency communications operators and dispatchers today. There's no reason why it comes in, it's not there today. But they didn't want to have a vote because they're just playing politics. But unfortunately, they don't realize, Honorable Speaker, and again, with greatest respect, they don't realize that I get 2 hours to outline my case at third reading. And I'm taking every minute of those 2 hours to outline why we should have done this, knowing that I probably wouldn't have had members opposite support, because they've had my amendments for 3 days, and the member from Chilliwack never got back to me about any views on anything about this. So clearly it was a game. It was a game, Honourable Speaker. BC Liberals, once more, playing games at the expense of British Columbians. I do see another school group here, and I'd like to look to the member, my friend here. I will understand that I'll just pause briefly, Honourable Speaker, with leave to allow him to introduce them.
Member for Surrey Cloverdale.
Speaker, it's my pleasure to give the member a break in the midst of his 2-hour speech that he is giving. And again, Madam Speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce to you the second of 3 classes that are here today from Surrey Christian School. They're here with their teachers, their parents, that are chaperones and others, and so I would ask the House to please make these wonderful students from Surrey Christian School very welcome to the House.
Oak Bay Gordon Head.
Thank you. I will proceed, and I believe there's a third class coming, so I look forward to the value added to provided to the introduction at the start of the introduction as well. Perhaps the member might want to tone that down, otherwise leave may not be granted in a third time. But I do continue, Honourable Speaker. Where was I? I was talking about the importance of having a carrot and a stick, knowing full well that there are organizations where nothing is done. Nothing is done because there's no incentive to do anything about abusive work environments. Abusive work environments with systemic harassment, this systemic bullying. I see another few teachers in the audience. Let me talk to them who are here and talk to the relevance of this case so the children in the audience and their parents know what we're talking about. What we're talking about here to the gallery is we're talking about the bill which is called Bill 9 Workmen Compensation Amendment Act. We're now at third reading of that bill. We went from first reading where it's introduced, second reading where we made our points known, and then the controversy, which has led me to try to explain what's been going on here, was that at committee stage, where we go line by line, we had an agreement that there would be a number of questions coming from the Liberals opposite, and then the member from Chilliwack, who knew all the amendments I was going to bring forward, decided to play some political games and not actually stand down when I was 3 minutes late into the chamber, so we couldn't bring forward the amendments to the bill and have the discussion there. The thing is, obviously, the member didn't realize that at third reading, I get a full 2 hours to explain these amendments and what I was hoping to do and why this bill is on dodgy grounds for approval without these other bills. And one of the things I've been putting forward here is that in this bill is a presumptive clause. Right now, if you suffer mental illness that's a direct consequence of your workplace, and you are covered under workman's compensation, you must go to workman's compensation and prove that your mental disorder is a direct consequence of your work. So you can imagine a firefighter who have to see some horrific things, or a police officer have to see some horrific things, and this bill is actually giving firefighters and police officers the right to not have to prove to workman's compensation that their mental disorders are a direct consequence of their workplace, but rather if they have the psychiatric or psychological assessments, the medical assessments that suggest it is to be so, they will start getting benefits immediately, which are better than long-term disability benefits, but workman's compensation still has the ability to challenge it. So it's called a presumptive clause. It's really important. But what is done in Alberta and Saskatchewan to the gallery there is that they have presumptive clauses for all workers. And the examples I've been giving here, I'll give one that's relevant to teachers. Teachers, for example, the speaker a teacher. I don't think you heard my example. You weren't in the chair at the time. Teachers, my wife's a teacher. Most of my family are teachers. Teachers have an amazing job. They get to instill, knowledge in youth, and particularly at that age when you guys are sponges for knowledge, and you're so exciting to actually try to get you to talk about, what inspires you and to ask questions. You're all scientists because kids are all born scientists. They always ask why, asking questions. But teachers, not all teachers have the best working environment, and I know some. I know some who work in environments that one might argue are actually abusive. I know some who feel that they don't get the support they need. In fact, I know some very specifically where the duties to report under the Act are such that when they report inappropriate issues that they must report, it falls upon the deaf ears of the administrators. It falls on the deaf ears of the senior administration. It falls upon the deaf ears of the school boards. And in one particular case, they start to get attacked for having the gall to raise this issue. Can you imagine being a teacher when you know something wrong is happening to a child? Or you know that a child is in a family, an abusive family, and you've reported it, and nobody's listening. And you have to go into that classroom every day, every day, every day. And you know as a teacher that you're the first responder because you're the only voice that that child has. That only voice that that child, that safe voice that that child has. But you feel powerless as a teacher to do anything because nobody's listening to you. These are true stories, true stories. I know about that, and I'm sure other teachers know teachers like that too. So what happens? Systemic, time after time after time, you develop anxiety and depression issues. There's no doubt. If you had broken your hand on the workplace because there was something inappropriate and there was some slippery soap on the floor and you broke it on the job, you'd be covered by workman's compensation. But if you happen to suffer depression and anxiety as a direct consequence of your workforce, you'd have to stand before the workman's compensation and prove it. You'd have to prove it, even if you had psychological assessments and doctor's notes saying it was. And you'd have to relive these stories. And you'd have to argue. And you'd have to argue against a tribunal. And, you know, the minister knows that that's not the easiest thing to do, even with a broken arm, if there's a challenge, because there's no presumptive clause. Were there a presumptive clause, you'd be covered. You'd be covered and presumed that your illness was from your work, assuming you had the appropriate medical backup. And what WCB could still challenge it down the road. We had the opportunity in this bill to have a debate at committee stage, to have a debate about the amendments that this member's opposite knew I was going to bring forward, because I gave it to them. And I was told that we're going to actually get back to you about them. And they never got back. And I was told that the member opposite had quite a number of questions on Section 1, and that he knew I was going to come up, and I was 3 minutes late. What an opportunity for him, Honourable Speaker, to play games, to shut down debate. That's shameful, Honourable Speaker. That's shameful, Honourable Speaker, because it's not doing what this place is supposed to do. We here in British Columbia are supposed to debate the issues brought to us. We're supposed to put our constituents front and center. We're supposed to challenge government when we see a bill, such an important bill like this, and when you've sat for 3 days with amendments before you, and you know what they're going to be. We have a duty and responsibility to debate these, not to play games. It's a sad day. You know, I don't know what professions the parents are up there. The parents are up there, but I suspect maybe there's an office worker up there. Maybe there's an office worker up there, and they'll know, or maybe they know somebody in another job that works in an abusive environment where the boss has no accountability to upper management and creates an environment purely out of insecurity that is abusive or harassing to an employee. But that employee can't leave because they need the job. Here we had an opportunity in this bill to not only include police and fire and correction officers and sheriffs, but also to include, as did the province of Alberta and Saskatchewan, all workers covered under the Act. And again, if the government truly believed that its commitment to dealing with the issues of mental health and addiction, through the creation of a separate ministry, it would stop stigmatizing the difference between physical illness and mental illness, which is exactly what's done here. Because it is only the physical response that we think is creating the mental illness. It is only the case of first responders who might have to respond to a car accident, or police officers who might have to go into a home and see some horrific scene. Those senses are your eyes. This is only responding to those people who are actually experiencing things through their eyes. Not through their ears, but only their eyes. Only horrific sights. But we know that mental health disorders in the workplace come far beyond just the traumatic events. In fact, Our own workman compensation legislation recognizes that there's two types. There's two types of mental health disorders that can occur in the workplace. Some are traumatic, leading often to PTSD, and others are systemic, like harassment and bullying. It's recognized it right there, and we're saying, okay, we recognize that there are two types. We recognize that. We recognize also that police officers and firefighters, paramedics, can't imagine what they have to go through. They see a lot of the first trauma type, the traumatic event. They see, say it again, they see a lot of the first type. But there are others who experience the other first type daily. And the only reason why I can think that 9/11 dispatchers are not included is because a 9/11 dispatcher can't see what is there, they only hear it. But I would argue that if members in the government had recognized or read the literature, the master's thesis that I brought forward yesterday as an example, the statistics, they would see, Honorable Speaker, they would see that in fact it's very clear that sometimes the most profound mental health disorders and consequences come not so much from seeing something happen, but by your inability to actually prevent something from happening, even though you wish you could. I read the compassionate and compelling story by one emergency call receiver who had on the phone a young man, or I don't know if it's young, a man who had committed harikari and whose entrails were hanging out. And he phoned her, and she developed a rapport with that individual. But because he had a knife, she had to call in the emergency response team, or the dispatcher did. And they wouldn't go in until a spud gun was produced. And the man was all in distraught. And she was reprimanded initially for actually not getting off the phone. Her PTSD was so profound that when the minister, now the member from Vancouver Hastings, when he, in his speech yesterday, thanked her. He thanked her for informing him over the years about this issue of presumptive clause. Yet she wasn't covered by a 9/11 dispatcher. She had a panic attack. She had a panic attack last night watching this because she was pleased to hear the government was potentially going forward. You know, it's good to see that we're going to get some more debate from other members here. We can get a rip-roaring third reading debate here. I see some other members will be joining me in coming up in the debate. I look forward to my friend from Peace River South. He might be able to do the job that the member from Chilliwack never did, which is actually raise issues and challenge government on this particular. Well, the member from Peace River South, a member who
Relevance to the bill, member?
Right. Member from Peace River South, as you know, Honourable Speaker, is from the city of Dawson Creek, a wonderful part of town right in the centre of gas country. Now, a question I hope he will address in raising this is those gas fitters, those gas field workers. You know, you can get physical accidents in the gas field. Happens all the time. You can get physical, we have, accidents on the construction sites. If you break an arm, you're covered. There's no presumptive issues because it's a physical injury. Now, what about if you're the person who's standing by as your coworker gets run over by a truck? Your best friend's daughter gets run over by a truck on the field, or your best friend's, your best friend or your partner falls down and has a horrible accident on the site. There's no presumptive clause. You have to prove, even though this could have happened, this physically debilitating, if not a fatal injury that happened on the workplace, what would be covered if that person survived? But you would be covered if you broke your arm and tried to help them. But you wouldn't be covered unless you could prove that your subsequent PTSD or a mental disorder was a direct consequence of your workplace. That's wrong, Honourable Speaker. That's completely wrong. The province of Alberta recognized it was wrong. The province of Saskatchewan recognized it was wrong. In the case of 9/11 dispatchers, other provinces, including very recently, the province of Nova Scotia recognized it was wrong. It was wrong to actually only have a presumptive clause for professions that are first responders that see that see, as opposed to also hear or witness as bystanders or second responders. You know, I hope, again, I do have some confidence with that said, and again, I come back to it again, the Minister of Labour, it is Labour, I believe, Minister of Labour, I've had many discussions with him about this issue. I do understand, particularly from his union background, that he recognizes the issue is far broader than just police, fire, paramedics, first responders. I recognize that he realizes that emergency dispatchers are critical, and I'm hoping he will rise at third reading and afford me the opportunity of the words I was hoping to extract from him during committee stage to outline a pathway that he sees forward in terms of this bill. I would like to give him that opportunity, and I'd like to give him that opportunity while I sit here and listen. And with that, Honourable Speaker, I hope the Minister is able to stand next, and I will sit and take my place at third reading and listen to the other debates.